Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October 4th, 2021 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And first up on the agenda today, we are talking about our buildable lands inventory and the urban growth boundary. And it looks like Brad Clark is coming up to present. Hi, Brad.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Yes, we can talk about the buildable lands inventory for sure. What I primarily had in my notes from your last meeting when we talked about having this on the agenda was where are we at with the actual rezone. The buildable lands inventory is combined with our housing needs analysis. Those two documents are currently scheduled for a December public hearing at the Planning Commission. The council did receive a pretty thorough update on the buildable lands inventory and housing needs analysis a couple of months ago from our consultants, 3J Consulting and FSA. And there really have not been any significant changes to those two documents since the presentation. It shows about 4,055 units that we're going to need by the year 2040 in this community. It shows that we do have sufficient land supply in the urban growth boundary that we have in order to meet that need. And then, you know, it goes into a lot more detail, and I can certainly go into that, but I thought I'd focus on the urban growth boundary rezone, and then we just see where your questions go from there, Council.
Sounds good. Vanessa and DJ are with us on the phone, everybody. And I think everyone else is here. Yes.
Okay. So the subject is to update the council on the status of the urban growth boundary project, and the relationship to your council goal is to facilitate sustainable and manageable growth by increasing the supply of urban zoned land for development. So the first couple slides here, just some background. In 2014, the city expanded the UGB to its current location, and that land that was added had both rural zoning and city zoning. And the city in 2020 decided to submit a rezone application for all of that property that was added in 2014 that did not have city zoning, to rezone all of that property to a city zone. Multiple zones are there, but some kind of city zoning. It's about 540 acres that are impacted by the project. And the main objectives are to increase our land available for development and implement the adopted community priorities and vision for those areas. So so here's the 5 sub areas that are in the application. So starting in the north and kind of working our way down, we have the North Area A and North Area B. This North Area A is primarily off of Highland Avenue. And then as we move south, primarily we have west. We have what we call in the west area here, which is close to Lower River Road. We have quite a bit of commercially zoned area in what's called Southwest AB. This is off of Redwood Highway, US 199. And then the Allen Creek Road area, what's called Southwest C, and then southeast, the area kind of down off of Overlawn and Cloverdale. So those are the 5 main areas.
Can I just ask you, Brad, what the colors represent? Because I know that there's different colors, and I was unsure what those colors meant.
Sure. So the colors are representing the city zone that would be designated on those properties if they were rezoned as proposed. So staff and the consultants went through and assigned what, based on the comprehensive plan, we thought were the most appropriate city zones for each parcel. So yeah, I apologize, the legend doesn't reflect that, but basically the blues are either business park or industrial, and the yellows are a residential type zone. There's low, medium, and high residential densities there. And then the red or the pinks, which again, we really only have that in the Southwest AB. Those are the commercial.
Does the gold represent urban growth? I mean, yeah, the urban growth boundary. I'm just, there's yellow and then there's the gold. And so I can see the gold there around Allen Creek. I'm just trying to get what that represents.
So that, the gold is of the residential zones. That would be the medium. So that would be like an R2 or an R3. So that moved through to the Urban Planning Commission. October 28th, 2020 was the first public hearing. And the Oregon Department of Transportation submitted a letter for that hearing expressing some concerns based on Oregon Administrative Rule 660.012, and that is also called the Transportation Planning Rule. That rule was put forward by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, I think more than 10 years ago now. And one of the pieces in that rule, the Transportation Planning Rule, says if you are an Oregon city and you put forward a rezone, a zone map amendment, that zone map amendment has to address the projected increase in traffic as a result of that rezone, as well as identify any funding to address the projected deficiencies that are projected as a result of the increased traffic. So that's kind of a crude summary of that rule, but that's kind of the focus of what that letter said. So that really kicked off the next several months of conversations and trying to work with ODOT to more specifically understand the implications of their interpretation of that rule. So in November 2020, we did ask John Replinger, the city's transportation engineer, to take a look at that letter from ODOT, take a look at the city's rezone, and give his opinion about what would be needed. He said, well, that would likely result in an amendment to the Transportation System Plan, which the city adopted in October of last year, because of the scope and the overall impacts on the system. So as a result of that, we came to the council in November 23rd, and the next step alternatives were presented. There was some direction to pursue a transportation impact analysis there. We continued the public hearing in December 9th at the Planning Commission. December 31st, we wrote a letter to Oregon Department of Transportation stating some of why we felt we could proceed and some of our disagreement. Then we had an actual meeting with the consultant, with staff, and with ODOT in January. In March, we had another City Council workshop. That's where we presented the $36,500 bid from David Evans and Associates to prepare that traffic impact analysis. Council gave us the go-ahead. We did enter into that agreement with DEA, and that's still an active agreement. April to July, we had several more conversations between DLCD, staff, the consultant, seeing if there was any opportunity to proceed with the full 540-acre rezone. We had a memo that was sent to Oregon, to ODOT, summarizing an August 6th meeting that we had. And then September 2nd, we received ODOT's letter summarizing that meeting. So the next couple of slides will kind of go into that August 6th meeting, which was really the most recent dialogue that we've had back and forth. Is kind of summarizing where we're at today. So what we did on August 6th, we presented findings from the October Transportation System Plan that the council adopted. And what we wanted to do was say, okay, ODOT, as a result of what you're asking for, here's our interpretation of what it would do. And I've got a slide here in just a couple of minutes that will show really what we think is the significant impact of that on their system. But the gist of it is that we would shift a lot of funding that is currently going towards sidewalks, multi-use pathways, that's going towards some other multimodal facilities, and shifting those all towards single occupant vehicle traffic lanes. So basically improving the highway system. So ODOT agreed to consider some future intersection performances. This gets into a lot of technical detail about, well, if we adjust the timing, for example, on the signals, how does that improve traffic? They agreed, yeah, there probably is some improvement there that would take some of the load off, but it's certainly, in their opinion, it's not going to be enough to warrant moving ahead with the rezone project just by adjusting some timing on some signals, for example. But they did agree to look at some of that work. They did not agree to commit funding towards capacity improvements. And this is one of the key points and takeaways from this meeting. We all agree that as a result of upzoning these properties, you're going to have over time, significant increase in traffic to 238 Williams Highway, to 199, to the Parkway. But that's not going to happen all at once. But the point is that the transportation planning rule says you still have to address it. You still have to analyze it, and you have to identify funding to meet those improvements.
So when you say that they didn't approve funding to help with that, those improvements, were you hoping or expecting that they might? And if so, why were you hoping that, and why did they decide not to offer any help there?
Well, my own expectation is that there would be some. I mean, what we're talking about are ODOT facilities. We're not talking about city-owned or city-managed right-of-way. These are, we recognize that the city arterials are our jurisdiction, and yes, that's our responsibility. But for the 199, for 238, Highway 238, that there would be some commitment to doing that. So that yes, there was some of that expectation,
So is there some condition that the city can meet to have them step up to? Are they giving us a condition that they'd want to see first? Or are they just saying we ain't paying anything?
Well, that's a much bigger discussion. At this point, the answer is no, we are not able to commit to the city to fund any of that. That's just where they're at. We would probably need to have them come and give their more detailed explanation.
So Brad, I'm not familiar with ODOT's allocation of funding, but I would guess it's done at one time with priorities, and that they don't commit on a project-to-project basis on a single negotiation with a single entity. But they look across the state on priorities across the state, and they do that maybe once a year or once every 6 months or whatever, and that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to commit funding at a meeting like this. Is that correct or not?
Oh, yeah, no, that's definitely correct. They have a STIP, the State Transportation Impact, or Improvement Plan, which identifies multi-year funding for transportation, as Councilor Lovelace knows.
I was going to say, right now they're working on the 2024 through 2027 STIP, so they're so far out ahead, and they do an analysis and come back, but really transportation funding is way down the line, and they're going through some major changes. They have in probably the last 5 years, I would say, just because they used to do enhancement projects, and it was a different kind of funding, and they would have these big projects that regions would go through, but they've been restructuring huge. And they are looking more to multimodal and transit and other sorts of what they're trying to get people to go towards, which makes it more difficult for some of us rural people who that's not exactly an easy thing to do. But it has been going through a lot of changes. And they also have been, the gas, they're worried about their future income, because right now gas usage is going down as we develop more electrical vehicles. So, they're kind of they do not want to overcommit. Let's just put it that way. So they're cautionary.
Well, it seems to me like the other important thing is they did not disagree to not consider committing funding in the future.
Yes, and I will say
So that was a consideration for the future in their process.
And there have been some things that our mid-road metropolitan area has tried to get extra funds for planning for those sorts of things. So we are trying to get them, but it is not an easy, oh yes thing. We're looking long-term. So I would just say that I don't think it's totally out of it down the road, but it's not going to come right now. And they are looking for local people to be able to say, well, what are you going to put in into it too? So, and that's important from their perspective.
Yeah, I would say that Wade Elliott, our Assistant Public Works Director, was the other staff person that was involved with these phone calls, and he's also the staff person that kind of walked our transportation system plan, through the adoption process. So he's the other resource on this. The last point there, at the August 6th meeting, ODOT stated that DLCD, under the climate change rulemaking that's underway, is looking to amend the transportation planning rule for cities within MPO boundaries. They brought that up mainly because that draft rule does speak more to multimodal facilities and less money towards traditional vehicle traffic facilities only. That rulemaking has not been adopted. We don't know exactly the timeline on it. So this slide was prepared by our consultant, and this was presented to ODOT on August 6th. The left column, or the first column here, is what our adopted transportation system plan has in it in terms of the primary projects. It's about $70 million of transportation improvements. This is our Tier 1 list. There's 3 tiers in the TSP. The Tier 1 are the ones that are expected within the 2040 timeframe. And the majority, you can see here, the green is city multimodal and sort of complete street improvements. So there's a big chunk of that that's designated towards that use. The second column here is what we anticipate if the transportation impact analysis were to go through for the 540-acre rezone, and how that could shift and force us to amend the TSP. And a huge chunk of that would be towards the fourth bridge, which is identified in the TSP, but it's not a Tier 1. And it would relieve a significant amount of traffic because of the Y interchange there at 238, 199. But again, that's going to be taking a significant amount of money that was anticipated in the Tier 3 or beyond, and moving that up and shifting around the multimodal facilities and basically reducing what kind of funding is available to those projects. There wasn't any really disagreement from ODOT staff when we presented this. They said, yeah, that's certainly one likely outcome.
I have a question. What's the difference between RTP multimodal and the city multimodal? The light green and the dark green.
So I believe, I don't know the details to that, council, or that's the regional transportation plan, and I don't know if maybe
Is that regional? Okay.
Jason has some input on that. There are some multimodal facilities through the regional plan, not just the cities.
I was just going to say that's exactly it. It's projects that are within the regional plan that do come into or out of the city that we have a portion of a share in. So those might be county or state facilities.
Okay. And then I just am kind of trying to clarify this in my head. So basically what they're saying is that by bringing on, if we were to do the whole 440 acres and bring that on, that there would be enough of an impact that we would have to consider putting the bridge in to really make it happen. Is that looking at this is kind of what I'm saying, is that ODOT is coming back and saying if you were to bring in that whole 540 acres, there's much of an impact that you would truly have to prioritize that bridge. Is that correct?
Well, to be clear, it's not ODOT that's saying that exactly at this point, because
Okay.
this is our consultant's
Okay,
projection
okay.
of
Thank
what
you.
would happen in ODOT's concurrence, but it's not
Okay.
it's not like that detailed analysis has been done by ODOT staff in Salem, and they're saying this is
So this
what
is
would
coming from the consultant?
Yes.
That's important. Thank you.
So here, just a couple of quotes from that from the September 2nd letter, which again was in response to that August 6th meeting in our summary. They summarized the 3 transportation project tiers. They said it's likely that the urban growth boundary rezone proposal will expedite the need for mitigating a number of facilities that are not projected to meet mobility target. It is unclear how future congestion relief funding for roadway projects will be prioritized. Another quote, it is extremely unusual to see a city legislative change zoning on such a large scale, obliges the city to make findings that transportation projects required to support that growth exist or will be provided by the end of the planning horizon. And the planning horizon in this case, again, is 2040. The city will have to show current funding sources to develop new sources or develop new sources that could potentially, that could financially support these projects. And finally, we no longer have a consistent funding mechanism to fund modernization type projects. So those are just pulling out a few of the statements from that letter. So what I felt kind of highlighted and underscored their general position. So where do we go from here? We could move ahead, complete a TIA for the full 540 acres. That would require, as I said, changing the transportation system plan. It would also mean additional cash to pay our consultant because the level of work that's required to do, excuse me, all 540 acres is going to be far exceeding the $36,000 contract that we currently have. Second, we could complete the rezoning in 3 to 4 phases, meaning we still do the full 540 acres, but we just break it up into smaller pieces, meaning we only have to do a transportation impact analysis for a portion, and then we could fund another portion, we could fund another portion, so that would be multi-year effort. At this point, community development staff's not recommending either 1 or 2. The third, we could proceed with a city-initiated rezone. An option is to not proceed with any city-initiated rezone at all. And Aaron has mentioned several times in the past that, you know, the developers, the development community has the chance right now to come in and rezone any of these properties if they choose. The city-initiated rezone is what we're saying. We could just drop the whole effort and allow the development community to come through. We did have that about 1.5 years ago at the corner of Harbeck and Allen Creek. There's 5 acres there that the owner did come in with her own application to rezone that property to R4 zoning, and that was approved. And so, you know, that same process is still there and available. Number 4, suspend current rezoning activity and wait for outcomes of the ongoing state rulemaking. I put 18 plus or minus months there. Again, we don't have a hard, firm date on that, but the point there would just be we would be communicating that yes, the city is still planning to proceed with this, but we're going to wait and see with these new rules if that kind of works more in our favor and may allow us to proceed without spending as many resources on the transportation analysis piece. And then 5th, we could complete a transportation impact analysis for Allen Creek sub-area alone and proceed with the rezone only for the north and for Allen Creek. Now I put north on there because here is Highland Avenue starting about at I-5 exit 58 and heading to the north. There is quite a bit of commercial property there that could be rezoned business park. And there really has not been a concern expressed by ODOT on that particular stretch. And so we are anticipating that we could just go ahead and proceed with that rezone without too much additional cost. Well, really any additional cost as far as the impact study goes. And there's no residential land in there that's 100% commercial or industrial. And so that could proceed. The second area that could proceed under the contract that we currently have with our consultant is the Allen Creek. And there on the right side are just some advantages. I should point out these two slides, that one, the one before and this one, were not in your, in the packet that we sent out on Friday. I looked at it this morning and thought this might be helpful for you. So this slide just shows the Allen Creek area here at the corner of West Harbeck and Allen Creek going down towards Denton Trail. And it's about 45 parcels that are in here, and our consultant could complete the traffic impact on just that area under the current contract, so that's an advantage of proceeding. We also in 2018 did a pretty significant survey to that area of the neighborhood to try to gauge their interest in a rezone process. So we have some outreach already. The third bullet there, there's a design underway for the Arterial street widening project, and Jason can could give more detail on that. But that's that engineering design is well underway for widening that to our Arterial standard. Right now, it's just a narrow 2-lane rural section. So 5th would be that there are existing utilities in Allen Creek already. And then the last, the development potential in general, it's fairly flat out there. They're fairly good sized parcels. Several of them are 5 acres or more. And we have received some interest from those property owners in proceeding. So those are all, we think, good reasons to maybe proceed with just that area. So the cost implications, the Allen Creek, as I mentioned, can be completed within the budget of the existing contract. And then the TIA for any additional sub-areas that would require new funding. Call to actions, your discretion. The rezone application will need to be refiled regardless. That's just kind of a heads up that at this point the proposal has, we have dropped the public hearing notices, so we would have to start over with the public hearing notices on those.
Thanks, Brad. Council, you have questions? Joel?
So Brad, at Allen Creek, is it also true, if I correct my memory, if I'm wrong, that ODOT has already committed dollars for that widening project? And it's ODOT dollars that are doing that for us, is that correct?
Yeah, Jason can.
So those are all city resources that are funding that project.
Okay.
Because of the nature of the funds, the city is unable to spend those ourselves, so we contract with ODOT to administer the project.
Okay, then who pays for the condemnation for the increased footprint?
The project will.
Okay, so those are city funds that will be administered by ODOT. Did I hear?
There
you
will
correctly?
be some city funds, but they're largely federal
Federal
in
funds.
nature. Yep,
Okay,
that
and they're
have come to the
channeled through
city.
through ODOT?
Yes,
Okay, so they're federal funds that we can leverage that are funneled through ODOT, and they go through a prioritization process, just like we talked about before, and they agreed that was a priority, correct? ODOT
correct.
is.
They're funds that the city has applied for through the MPO to put towards this project.
Right, so then I would ask the question, given that we've gotten this investment and we've gone through that planning so far, why wouldn't we follow through with that investment, both with our transportation analysis plan and with the federal funding that's funneled through us through ODOT? I would think that we would want to get something out of that and follow through with that.
And just to be clear, that is, sort of proceeding regardless of what the decision is on this rezone. I mean, that's a kind of a parallel track, but it's, yeah.
Kind of symbiotic.
And
Valerie?
I'll add to that, because yes, we just recently, because this was originally proposed back in 2015, the MRMPO did, because the costs have gone up like threefold since that time. So the additional money needed has been approved. So that, like you said, this is parallel universes, but this is probably a good time to do both, because that is the move that, and if I'm not correct, I think the design of it is in the process and will soon be done.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. On the last slide, the Allen Creek slide, this is kind of an aside, but I'm looking at the zoning there and I see up at the corner there's R4 and then I see adjacent is R2. Can you remind me on our minimum density discussions, are we looking at putting that on R2 or are we just looking at R3 and R4 for the minimum density discussion?
So the Housing Advisory Committee has kicked around both, but the latest recommendation is to not include R2 under the minimum density rules.
Okay, so in that case, my question would be, is there any opportunity, and I know this hasn't obviously been done yet, but is there any opportunity that some of that R2 could potentially be R3? Is that something, it isn't set in stone yet, or?
That's correct. What's currently driving this is the comprehensive plan designation, which gives some flexibility for what the zone is. And so the comp plan designation on this area is that sort of the medium residential tier, which would allow for the R3.
Okay, so would there be a staff review of that as this moved through the process, or how would that work exactly if there was to be R3 considered for some of that?
Well, we would do our normal analysis like we do with any zone map amendment. There's some required findings that are in the development code that we have to make, that we have to look at. Frankly, this is probably the number one issue, and that's looking at, if it was all R3, what would be the projected traffic at build out versus if it was all R2, what would be the projected traffic, or, and the distribution of that traffic too. Because right now that south end, that's barricaded off at Denton Trail. You are forced to go north. So some assumptions would have to be looked at, if those barricades are removed. There's a lot to look at about which zone we end up recommending.
We would definitely need and desire, if it's something other than what you're looking at there on the screen, which is sort of in association with our comp plan, need council policy direction that you would want to consider a higher density level in that area.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Valerie?
Would that require if you have a higher density, then is right there with that, so we would do the traffic analysis based upon what's here now, is that correct? So if we needed to do that policy change, we would need to do it before they went out and did the traffic?
So
No.
most efficiently to utilize the resources and time is we would need to have that discussion on what you would like to see from a density level in this area before we do the impact analysis.
Because a higher density would be a higher impact.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that direct correlation.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. We'll give Vanessa and DJ, I don't know if there's a lag at all, but do either of you have any questions?
I have none, thank you.
I don't have any.
Thank you.
I also have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, DJ. Council, any discussion? Brian?
I'm glad that staff brought us so many alternatives to consider. I think that's fantastic. I personally am leaning towards the fifth one. You know, Allen Creek and the north end. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like a good middle ground. It sounds like some progress for us. I would like to consider waiting to do that TIA on Allen Creek until maybe we get a little bit of input from Housing Committee and maybe have a discussion about if that should be all R2 zoning or if maybe that should be some sort of mix of R2 and R3, because doing the TIA and then having the discussion and then having to do another TIA wouldn't be very efficient. So I'd be in favor of 5 after having a zoning discussion.
Rick?
I'd also be in favor of Allen Creek and North area proceeding forward. I'm open for discussion on introducing R3 in there too. There may be some property owners that would like to see that. I'm concerned, and I think I'm recognizing the fact that ODOT up till now has not had any additional transportation funding, and there's one before Congress right now, but it has not passed. And as Valerie mentioned, because of the hybrid technology and just the fact people aren't traveling, ODOT's not getting the funding through the gas tax. So they're not willing to commit to these projects, which then they say, if we want to move forward, then the obligation is for us, the city, to come up with the funding. And I know that's not realistic either. So, so that's why I would be in favor of doing the piecemeal that's been suggested. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Valerie?
Well, there's no doubt that I am in favor of moving forward with Allen Creek, because I think that potentially wise is probably our best possibility of getting housing up and running as quickly as possible. And I do know some people who, and some of the land out there is actually currently owned by developers who are kind of waiting for the city to move forward to do something with that. So I would definitely go for 5. I have mixed feelings on the zoning, and that's because things take time, and this project has, you know, and I don't know how much time that it would take. I would want to get on it right away so that there's no blips in the system, because this has been sitting out there since 2014 and needs to be done. So my recommendation, if that wants to be a discussion, that we get on that right away so we don't hold up any further.
Joel?
The other thing that was in the back of my mind, and this is kind of off the radar a little bit, but in transportation analysis, we've traditionally used autos and roads, and we are a small city, so, you know, other alternatives may or may not be viable, but at least think about them, so that if, well, we're not going to have a BART, obviously, that bores underneath the river, but there might be some other options too in the long run at some point in time that may make sense, that could be part of our transportation system.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to add, I have a question for Jason, actually. It seems to me that there is the bikeway over, is it from Fifth over, is that part of our transportation plan? I know we've talked about it, we've discussed it. Is that written up in the transportation plan?
Well, I was going to say yes right out of the gate, and then I had to go backwards. I believe it is in the TSP, the Fifth Street crossing for PED. It is.
Okay, thank you, I thought so.
This is an imaginary bridge at Fifth Street, is that what we're talking about?
It is an imaginary bridge at Fifth Street.
Okay.
It was meant to be a bike connectivity connection.
Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion? DJ, Vanessa?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I am also in support of recommendation 5 on moving forward with the Allen Creek sub-area, making some progress on this. I did want to reiterate what Director Clark had said at the beginning, is that to the developers that do own property in the area and are interested in moving forward with developing it, they are able to move forward and complete a TIA on their own, outside of what the city is currently doing, to move forward and make progress in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, it sounds like we have some support for number 5, but it has been suggested maybe looking at rezoning first. Heard at least lukewarm support for that. Would you all be interested in having a workshop where we look at that specifically? Brian?
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at. I don't know if it should go straight to Housing Committee and then come to us, or if it should go to us, then Housing Committee, then us, but I think that would be a good idea.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Yes, I also support that.
Starting with us or starting with Housing Committee?
I have no preference, whichever is most efficient, but I do support moving forward and looking at that rezoning for higher density.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
I would say just to send it to Housing Committee, because it's going to have to go to them anyway, so I say just send it to them straight away.
Okay, is there council support for asking Housing Committee to take a look at rezoning that Allen Creek, Harbeck area? I'm seeing Kurt and Brian and Rick.
Yeah.
Is that-
As long as we can get it there quickly, but yes. I think
Valerie,
that's
yes?
the key, 'cause
Okay.
I think you're right, Brian. I think we'd probably kick it back to them. So I'd say I'd like to see them take a look at it first and then bring it back to us as soon as possible. Because we know anytime you go through that sort of zoning thing, it takes a while for it to happen. So it needs to happen ASAP.
Okay, let's go ahead and ask them to do that then. Thanks, Aaron. All right, next up on the agenda, well, first, is everybody done with that or any further discussion? All right, next up, urban campground discussion, and Aaron's going to start us off, and then it looks like we have Jed Keller and Doug Walker here as well.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I have a very brief presentation, and then we do have guests, as the Mayor mentioned, that will be able to provide any additional information and follow up with my introduction. So today is a discussion item for you to get a progress report on the community's efforts to establish an urban campground that supports your goals of facilitating sustainable manageable growth. Specifically, Objective 2, encourage an environment which provides for the growth of affordable housing opportunities for a variety of Grants Pass residents' needs, and that was a 3-star item through strategic planning. And further, Action 2, facilitate development of homeless shelter and or urban campground, which was a 2-star item through strategic planning. So there's just sort of a table of things that we've done, things that we're working on, just sort of a checklist. And it started out with, do we have some sustainable funding? Lead nonprofit identified, location, which is something that we're sort of talking about today to some degree, and that's one of the things that is active, but does not have a defined location yet. Do we have city? What kind of city support do we have? Law enforcement support, memorandum of understanding, and what other kind of support within the community, camp infrastructure, all those kind of things. There's a number of things that are being worked on or that have already been acquired. We do have some pallet shelters already in our possession. They're being housed at our fleet services. And so there's some things that are already in the works if and when an urban campground is established. So call to action is at council's discretion. One of the things that's been talked about is All Care Foundation has shown an interest in looking at taking the lead on acquiring a piece of property and partnering with Road Retreat and having ownership of that property for an urban campground. Through the discussions that they've had with us, one of the things they mentioned was a funding source. Are there opportunities locally for funding? And some of the funding options were the American Rescue Plan Act dollars at the county level, and then potentially at the city level. We're doing a survey for that to determine what community needs are and desires for our ARPA dollars. But ARPA dollars were one of those items as a potential funding source, whether we establish some kind of social services grant program or it's utilized through the county's grant program. There could be an additional request in the future from someone like the All Care Foundation if we do establish some kind of grant program. And with that, that concludes my report, my update, and I turn it over to you, Mayor. And I know we've got some guests here that have some things to say.
Thank you. Yes, we do have All Care Foundation members here to discuss partnering with us, and I know you gentlemen met last week, so let's hear what you have to say.
We created a little bit of a flyer for you all, and we'll go over it too.
Is that microphone on over there?
What's that?
Is your microphone on?
Yes, red light's on, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, red light's on. So we began to, this is Jed Keller, my name is Doug Walker. We're both on the board of All Care Foundation, All Care Community Foundation. So we, last 2 weeks or so, we started to work towards the urban campground, seeing if we can find a way to move the process along and somehow be involved and try to make the thing happen. So we began looking at what you all had, where you all had looked at for properties, and we picked up the conversation with some of those property owners, and we've identified 2 properties that fit the needs for the urban campground. And our initial conversations with those 2 property owners were positive. They're interested in selling, and the price is within reason. And so we're going to, if we get a sort of a positive feeling about you all wanting to move forward with this, we'll go and reapproach them and start to talk about negotiating prices with them. Let's see. So the fund budget that we've identified for the facility is approximately $1.2 million. That's to purchase land, to do the zoning, or get the permits going, put in the utilities, get the water and electrical on site. That would probably be about an 8-month period. I believe we can get the facility up and running in a much shorter time period, but they'll be done with temporary utility systems, such as what they do down in Medford, which is large tanks of water. They don't have power on site, but they bring in power. They do a few things to make that work. We'd end up doing the same thing to get it up and running right away, with the intent of, over the course of 6 months to a year, bringing in permanent utilities, and then beginning to put in permanent facilities such as showers and bathrooms.
We have had discussions and tours and meetings with the Road Retreat on the urban campground in Medford, and I think we clearly understand what the needs are, how the facility needs to be laid out, what the staffing requirements would be. Those discussions, I think, have advanced pretty far. So that part we feel very comfortable in terms of defining what would be needed to implement an urban campground.
Thank you. Questions? I see Rob, then Joel.
Who's providing the operating costs once the initial capital investment, and how much are the operating costs on a yearly basis?
Yeah, the operating costs vary from anywhere, we project varying anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000 a year. Those costs come from a variety of organizations, state and federal funding, all care reimbursement dollars. I don't remember off the top of my head. There was about 6 or so different entities that provide funding for those things.
Okay, so they would
We
come,
met with UCAN, and they clearly identified to us all the places that we could get that amount of money from an operating cost point of view.
okay,
We've also, given the history of Rogue Retreat, we were able to capture, here's what it's going to take to operate the facility, including staffing requirements and things like that. So the operating cost, we're pretty confident that we can find the money for that.
good for you, thank you. So then, I had 2 more questions. Did you get a feeling for, once a facility like this is in place, I've gotten a feeling that it didn't relieve the pressure on other public facilities such as the parks, unfortunately, and that those would still occur. Did you have any feeling, did you get any feeling for that when you were in Medford?
I would say yes, it has relieved the pressure on the parks. What's the name of the police unit that goes, the police?
The livability
The livability
unit.
unit they have, which is a term they use for a select group of individual sheriff and city police. They go and then they find these people wherever they happen to be, and they say, okay, you can go to this urban campground.
So you have less people then, like along the stream riparian area
yes.
down there in Medford because of that?
Yeah. And
It
it's
didn't
not,
attract even more?
does it attract even more? That I don't know. I'm not
Okay.
that familiar with Medford. I live in Grants Pass, so I
The
can't
the
say.
only reason I asked that question, and I struggle with it a little bit, to be honest with you, is when I would go down to Riverside, there were several people that came here from Medford to stay in our parks.
Right.
And they had all those resources down there, but they would rather stay in our parks than down there, and which kind of surprised me, which told me they really kind of like that independence. And
Yeah.
I don't blame them for that.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you with one individual or another. I do know of individuals that have done the opposite, that have gone down there because there's places down there
Sure.
that are safe.
The other
And
thing
they've
I
got
was
services
going to
down
ask, so with $250,000 a year maintenance costs,
Operating
how
costs.
many people are we talking about that are going to be hopefully helped out of that lifestyle in that year? What is the cost per person helped?
there. Oh, I couldn't tell you the cost per person. We haven't done that. I haven't done that math.
So what's the capacity of the camp if it was full?
We're looking at probably 50 to 70 once the camp is fully developed.
So
here in
50 to
Grants Pass.
70 and $250,000, so 50 into 250, that's what, about $5,000 per person probably? For operating costs, and then offsetting the $1.2 million over time. So it'd probably double that. So it's about $10,000 per person.
Well, it'd be more than 70 at a time because some of the people graduate, they move on to a variety of different programs. So 70 is the capacity, but it could be 70 every 3 months would be rotating through with an operating cost
Sure.
of, again, between 250
Sure,
and
it's an
500.
ongoing, in economics, it'd be an ongoing production success.
Right.
And that's 70 sites. There are quite.
More than one
commonly
occupant
there's
per
couples
site.
in those
Okay,
sites, right.
good, okay. So then, the last question, as I was listening to you, I forgot it, but I will remember it by the end.
So one of the other things is that
Oh, I know what it was. Go
Sure,
ahead,
go
go ahead. So, the other thing, and you being from All Care, depending on what your job carry, I really respect All Care, and I respect Doug. Working relationship has been tremendous throughout the last 10 years with a primary care office. What I noticed when we were in practice, medical practice, there was a lack of mental health facilities and a lack of treatment facilities for addiction. And, you can have an urban campground, but if you have those two things, it doesn't really help people. I mean, you just kind of, I don't know what you do, you just kind of, there's no rotate through, there's no benefit because you don't treat the causes of, or the lack of a family structure and the social, or, everybody has a mom and dad, but they don't always function and that kind of thing. So how are those community resources from All Care's perspective in terms of being able to actually help the people of an urban campground?
Yeah, so that, the point you bring up is sort of where the value is for an urban campground for the city. Okay, this is where the value is you're able to put somebody in an urban campground, and then you're able to start to wrap services around those people, right? And it doesn't happen when they sleep in the park. It happens when you have them at that. And so that happens in Medford, and it'll happen here. That's part of why there's such a high operating cost, is because there's 2 staff people there on all the time, and they are able to, they're case managers, and they're able to say, okay, what are you doing today? What's your next plan? What's the next thing you're going to do to a person? And part of that is having options on there, doing mental health evaluations and whatever else they need for mental health, and the same with all the other programs they do. And I don't speak very well to those programs.
Right.
Others do, but there's quite a bit of them.
So our experience in primary care was we embedded the psychologist in with our primary care, for that very purpose. And we had a partnership with Options to do that, and those resources are extremely scarce. And so are we going to have enough resources to do what we need to do?
Joel, I'm not sure that this is the conversation today is really about property, but, it might be better to talk to UCAN or Rogue Retreat about these services than these gentlemen here, but
Okay.
I would strongly encourage you to take a tour over in Medford.
Well, and I'll be happy to do that. I had one last question. When I read the deposition again, Kelly Wessel from UCAN gave a deposition for the plaintiffs. And with this urban ground, do the nonprofits in our community support people not camping in our public parks and using these other facilities once they're built? Or are they still going to support people camping in the parks?
I haven't had input for the nonprofits.
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know.
The nonprofits in this community have extensively supported Foundry Village, because I'm in charge. I do the fundraising part of it, and we've gotten a lot of support out of the community. So, and going to your comment, a lot of the questions are more appropriate for Rogue Retreat. I can tell you that Rogue Retreat has done an extensive amount of relationships down in Medford to develop the resources that these people need. Going back to an earlier question that you brought up, that the same model we'll do here, we'll work with the police department. Medford has a livability team. Rogue Retreat partners with them to go out to meet the people at the various locations, and they make an assessment of what some people are capable of moving into an urban campground. There are clearly still some people that will refuse to even participate at that level.
Sure.
With low barriers. But the partnership of Rogue Retreat and the police department together, which they've had a difficult time. I mean, they've had some times where they came out at 2 o'clock in the morning and broke up some of the camps, which got them a lot of bad press. They figured out different ways to do it, and we can take advantages of those lessons learned.
Sure. Well, again, I honor both of you for being here and for what you do, and thank you very much for being part of my community.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Joel, for being so detail-oriented. It's important. I would like to echo what Sarah just mentioned, and I've urged very clearly a couple times that anybody who's in this room, staff or counselors who has not visited the Medford facilities, should do that, because for me, seeing is believing. I visited all 3, and I'm not saying that even half of Joel's questions would be clearly answered by visiting, but what became very clear to me, and very clear I'm sure to everyone in this room, that the homeless problem is not going away, and this is the absolute first step to managing it. I mean, would every detail be filled in? Of course not, but we've got to give it a shot to manage it, and I appreciate Doug, a couple of your answers that really kind of address that, because it's not going away. One thing that I actually just occurred to me, and I may be, just wasn't that aware, but it just seems to me that in the last 6 months or so, there are many more car campers all around town. And I'm just hoping that whatever property that you guys are considering has plenty of room for all the car campers as well. And again, that's just based on my anecdotal observation, but I never used to see as many car campers around. So it's just something to consider. But my question was, you've got, so part of the 1.2 million was to extend utilities, water, sewer, electrical, et cetera. So when other property owners come on down the line and then used or take advantage of those being extended, do you guys have a way of recouping that? In other words, are you able to get some of those costs back? If you understand, I'm sure there's a, you know exactly.
Yeah, so both these sites have street frontage where the streets already have utility improvements in them. So we wouldn't be creating utilities that others would be able to benefit from. They would just be laterals onto the particular properties that we would buy.
And the other thing too is I want to thank you guys for basically at this point stepping forward to take the baton from the city in this process, because this was very clear to me that this would be the absolute first step that we've got to take. And I really appreciate you taking the baton at a time when, quite frankly, the city didn't seem to be able to bring it forward on our own. So thanks for your help.
Yeah, you all were moving the baton forward. You had it going at 10 or 20 miles an hour already, so I do appreciate that too.
Just to follow up on Rob's question, did you, is there space for car campers? You mentioned 50 to 70.
I think there should be, but there's some question about what we're allowed to do under the special use permit and whether we can do that or not. So we have to work that out. And we have to also understand that Rogue Retreat manages this. And so they really ultimately say, this is the amount of space they need between tents. This is what they're able to do. This is what works for them. So I want to say yes, but no guarantee to that, because Rogue Retreat may say, no, this has been a disaster for us in the past, so we don't want to go there. I don't know.
We are aware of the issue, and we can have that discussion with Rogue Retreat. Clearly, we've also talked about how we would facilitate the space once we get it, and that's one of the things we've taken into account.
Thank you. Brian, then Valerie.
Yeah, thanks for being here, guys. And thanks for following up, Sarah, on the car camping. That was going to be my first question. I think if there's a way to make that happen with whatever site you have, I think that would be very helpful, because it's actually two sides of the same coin.
Right, yeah, we recognize it too. It's just a matter of, we've only talked about tents at the moment.
Yep.
With Rogue Retreat, so. Yeah.
So my second question is about the county and potential for funding from the county. I understand that you may have applied for some of the funds from the county's ARPA funds, and I was just wondering if there's anything you can say about that.
I don't know the status of it.
There was no funding for this project that was applied for from the county. We are doing another Glencrest Village, which we did apply to the county for. Oh, sorry.
We're not talking about the address though. So.
Okay, so no, we did. They just closed the funding on, I think, the application on the 1st of October, and we've had no feedback on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's pending. You didn't apply for that.
So I'll clarify. So no, All Care Foundation has a separate project going that we applied for county ARPA funds from, and those were moved forward for us. But that's a separate project, has nothing to do with the urban campground.
I see.
That's kind of what Jed spoke to just now.
Sure.
We missed the doorway or window of opportunity to apply for county funds for an urban campground. So
Okay.
apparently it's closed.
Okay.
According to county.
Gotcha. And then my last question is about utilities for the site. I know that the Medford site does not have any utilities on site, so I could see that might not necessarily be a critical requirement to get it up and running, at least at the outset. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I wanted to address that. Yeah. So in the very beginning, we could literally put tents on the ground as soon as the property is owned, and there's a few, porta potties are out there and the shower trailers there and everything like that. There's some complications to it. So we don't need utilities right away. Medford is running theirs without any utilities, so we could do the same. But it's also very expensive and quite a lot of hassle for them. So we would like to phase into more permanent facilities that can be in 20 years transition to something else if we ever get to the point where we don't need an urban campground. But that'll take a year or two to get built. The utilities can come on site fairly quickly, but a permanent bathroom facility, a permanent shower facility will take a while to get built.
Yeah.
Also, Medford is for the urban campground, is on leased land, which the owner has no interest in selling as a family historical site. So they had some limitations there as well.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Valerie.
Yes, thank you so much for being here, because as Rob said, I think this is kind of we need a first step, and I appreciate you stepping up to the plate to help us get it started. My question kind of goes to what Brian was saying. The total cost is going to be 1.2 million, but that also includes installing utilities on the site and extending. So you're saying the extending part of it, extending the water, sewer, electrical would probably be a wise thing to do in the beginning, and then utilizing it down. I'm just trying to think if cost-wise.
I would say ignore the word extend, because it implies the sewer is 5 properties away. Sewer's not 5 properties away. It was just a word choice.
Okay.
It maybe implies something different in your mind.
Okay, so
But
basically
we
just
need
putting
to-
in.
We need to bring utilities onto the property.
Right. Okay, so that is, to me, would make sense with the purchase zoning permits and having that there. But the installing utilities down the road could be something that comes, I guess I'm just trying to find the difference between the two. And I know that basically what I'm kind of assuming is that we would not be able to make this decision today, or would we, because we're kind of waiting on the survey. So that's where I'm kind of trying to figure out, where exactly are we? Are we still waiting on the survey to see if indeed that's the push of the community? That's my question. Or are we making the decision right now?
I think we were not necessarily making this decision right now. However, I guess personally, I feel we also don't need to wait for the results of the survey, because we would still have a lot of funds available. Even if we were to use ARPA dollars for this, we could allocate, according to the survey results later. So I don't know that there was any promise that the survey results, would dictate all of the remaining funds. But that's obviously a council decision. I think it's been, well publicized throughout the year. This is something that we've been working on. We know that we have a number of complaints about homeless people in parks, and we need to do something about that situation. So, at your council's discretion, obviously.
And I guess maybe that's why my questions were being, are we, 1.2 with all of this, I can see it, but obviously the land and the permits would be not as much. So if we just kind of broke it into parts, that might be, from my perspective, more doable without getting the results from this survey.
I think it probably would be helpful for the council, gentlemen, to know what exactly the startup cost would be to get something, going ASAP. However, I also understand you may not want to disclose that because of the nature of property transaction, and don't want to give away your bottom line. So maybe that's something we need to address later when we're not in open session. Not later today, because it has not been announced to do that in executive session, but I think that the council ultimately will want to know what exactly is needed in the immediate future.
If I could comment, Rogue Retreat is excited and wants to move forward. We've lined out a number of different activities. We've identified and have an extremely strong commitment on the operating cost. And I've been doing the funding for sources for All Care Foundation, and I can say that we have found no other opportunities for funding this project except what we can talk about here today. So at this point, we're at a standstill until we know that there is money available.
So at this point, you have operational funds secured, but you need funds for the actual property acquisition and...
Well, operational funds are not secured. They're identified.
Identified.
Right. And so once the facility is there, then those operational funds can be acquired or secured. And then, so to Jed's point, we haven't found any other capital purchase funds available.
And we've looked.
Thank you. And we had not identified any other partners until we had you come along. And so that's why we were discussing going about purchasing the property ourselves. So, Valerie, did you get your questions answered?
Well, I guess I was kind of putting it out to the council as well. I personally am in favor of moving forward, and I do think that the support in the community is there to do something in terms of
moving forward with a partner that's well established. But I just don't know the amount and I just don't know whether, that's just kind of like this open book at this point.
Okay. Joel, do you have questions?
No, it's discussion.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions? Kurt?
If I pulled out my checkbook right now and wrote you the check, first off, it wouldn't clear. But when would you project I start the big scissors and cut the ribbon?
We still have to, I would say probably 2 months. We've still got to get some drawings done by some engineers. We still got to apply for permits, for special use permit. That's all a couple weeks each one, maybe 4 or 5 weeks at the building department. It's hard to say. It's kind of this is a very odd duck. But I would say 2 months, when we would actually be able to put some tents on the ground.
So we could have it inhabited by Christmas anyway.
So as Aaron pointed out earlier, there's a number of pallet shelters.
Jed, can I get you to use the mic?
Oh, sorry. As Aaron pointed out earlier, there are a number of pallet shelters already on site. There are a number of the large capacity tents that can typically hold 2 sites within them that they're either here or have been identified by Road Retreat for grants passed. So, it's a timeline that depends on Doug's point of view, negotiating the final real estate and closing the real estate deal. So,
right.
A couple months.
Yeah, and so what we would like to do is develop a proposal, bring it to you with a little more detail in maybe 2 weeks. And at the same time we're doing that, we would, Road Retreat would take the initiative to offer an earnest money agreement with the property seller, and then also start contractual with an engineer to come up with some site plans, and then that would be what we would bring to the city building department for a special use permit. So we would do all of those things concurrently.
Thank you.
If we get a sense that you want to move forward with this.
Rick?
Thank you. I believe Joel already asked the question, but I'll ask it again. Are you aware if Road Retreat has any statistics that when they established the campground, how effective it was on their homeless community? And I think you said you don't have that information.
No.
Okay.
I think that based on our 2 or 3 meetings, and including going back to the comment earlier, if you haven't toured the urban campground in Medford, it is a very worthwhile trip. It's a much different facility than Hope Village, but it shows you what can be done. It also shows you the difficult, challenging situation that the people were in. I think the Medford Police Department closely works with Road Retreat and would give them a very strong endorsement of that they have improved their homeless situation there. There are, going back to the comment earlier, there are some people that absolutely refuse to go into any kind of an organized facility.
Thank you. That was the type of information I was looking for. Thank you.
You guys have questions? Do you have a question, Rob?
I want to respond to your
discussion. Okay. Does anybody have questions for Jed and Deb? DJ and Vanessa, do you have any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, gentlemen. I think we're probably ready to move into a discussion here. I have a question that's maybe more for Aaron or Brad than anybody else, but as far as facilitating any sort of funds purchase, what a recommendation?
It's been recommended that if council is interested in doing something along the lines of providing resources to these type of activities, that we would through, and if ARPA dollars is the designated location for those revenues, that we do so through establishing some kind of a social service grant program and open that up to social services to apply for grants. You can have the window open for as long as you so desire, and designate, or you don't designate a certain dollar amount, and then through that application process, review those applications and provide resources associated with the application requests.
Thank you. Question along those lines or discussion?
It was a question about that, but other people have things to say too.
I think a question about that, go ahead, and then we'll move on to discussion.
Well, I was just wondering if we have the ability to just straight away grant money to an organization for this, or if we have to open up a grant process and have a grant program, have it be this whole thing, or can we unilaterally decide, kind of like we did with the water treatment plant allocation, could we do something similar for something like this?
So if we're talking specifically just the ARPA dollars, and your ability to allocate resources, I believe that this is an allowable expense of ARPA dollars. So that's a check mark in favor of that. And then whether you do a direct allocation or you establish a grant program to solicit social services, and this would be one of those that would fall under that one pillar, would ultimately be a council decision, although I would just say that it was recommended that we do a social services grant program, provide an opportunity for social service groups to apply for some ARPA dollars. And they would be one of those that we would, of course, encourage to apply. But I think both are open to you as options.
All right, thanks.
Okay, for discussion, let's do Rob, then Joel, and then we'll take hands.
A few different things. So addressing a little bit what Rick said, I had the question about how might it affect, the homeless community. And again, this comes back to actually visiting the campground in Medford. When I was there, the two little, and I'm sorry if I'm being gender biased and ageist and all kinds of stuff, but two little old white-haired ladies that felt a lot safer being in this fenced urban campground than being basically out on the green in the jungle on their own. So to me, that's like a quality of life and a safety issue that one of the objectives you'd want the homeless campground to achieve, and it seems to be doing that over there very nicely. But as far as waiting to get the surveys back, I think everybody in this room knows that, and I'm just going to go on the assumption that at least 85% of people in Grants Pass want us to do something about the homeless situation. There may be a lot of different ideas, but they want us to do something, and I'm convinced that this is the first step in managing it. The thing that I've thought, and this is a really fine line, that almost no matter what we spend on it, some people criticize us for spending too much on it. Oh, the homeless don't want to work, they're not worth it, whatever the statements that would come out, you can't spend the, okay. Well, I understand some, we're going to be criticized no matter what we spend on it, but on the other side of that, the homeless campground has to be more attractive to people than basically foraging on their own. So it needs to have bathroom facilities, it needs to have showers. In my opinion, it should have car can nearby, but I may not have enough experience with that. It needs to be a place where it is slightly better. For the majority of the homeless, it's a slightly more attractive option, because otherwise, why would they go to it? So it needs to be done well. If that means having utilities there to start, I refer to someone else to make that decision. But if it's done on the cheap, you need to have as many reasons as possible to attract people, because we do want homeless there, because they'll be easier to help. They'll be easier to help, bottom line. So it has to be done well. And again, I'm convinced this is the first step, and we need to take the first step. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel.
Well, I just want to be really open with our public, and so in the deposition in the lawsuit from Kelly Westholz with UCAN, she had numbers for homeless, and that was I don't know, 3 years ago, when it wasn't quite the problem that it was today. And she cited those numbers about 1,600. So I want to unmet expectations equal revolution. Their campground is not going to solve the issue in the parks unless people can't camp in the parks. And the only way that's going to happen is if there's a community want that to happen with a social fabric that includes everybody, including our nonprofits and our whole community, not just the neighbors that are being adversely affected. So I want those neighbors to know that even if we have an urban campground, it's not going to solve the issues in the parks. The numbers aren't there according to what the plaintiff said in their position. I've gone down to the park, and I go down once a week and talk to folks. There's a lot of people that are, in my impression, really like that freedom and they're camping in the parks. So, you know, the people that would voluntarily go to campground, even if it's active, they'll come. And the good thing is, it'll help some people. Hopefully it's 40 people a year or 60 people a year or whatever to get out of that lifestyle and to get out of that chain of events where they are. But it's going to solve the parks issue. I just want to be clear with people and their expectations. And that really isn't the motivation for the urban campground, because it's not going to solve that. It hasn't solved it in any other city. The motivation for the urban campground is to help 40 people or 50 people or whatever that don't have the support system to get a support system and maybe change their lives. And so we need to be really clear with those expectations and move forward.
Thanks. Rick?
So I have a question for Mark. I feel what Joel has said is accurate. So if I put on my rose-colored glasses, we established this urban campground, and then the person that launched the lawsuit against the city is so happy with our urban campground, they removed the lawsuit. Is that the only way the lawsuit's probably going to go away, other than waiting 2 or 3 years to go through courts?
Well, it's a different kind of lawsuit than your normal lawsuit. It seeks injunctive relief, and that injunctive relief is non-enforcement of certain camping regulations, and it hinges on the Boise decision, which essentially says that you can't go ahead and punish those for sleeping in public places when there is anything other than a surplus of social assistance beds available, shelter beds available.
So without going into detail,
would this make the lawsuit go away? No, I don't think so, because I think that at least part of the reason would be there's no guarantee that any urban campground that may be established will always be there.
Okay.
And so I think the point of it is to make, the ruling that Judge Clark set forth, to make that the permanent law here. And so it will wind its way through the appeal process in the background, and this is, a related concept, but I don't think that this should not be viewed as something to mitigate the lawsuit or be even in response to the lawsuit. They're totally separate, although somewhat related topics.
Okay, your comments are very helpful. Thank you.
Valerie?
I also think that if you have a place where people who are really truly in need of help and wanting help, and that's available, I think in a sense, what it does for me, and I don't know if this is whatever, it also makes me understand that, if you're still willing to hang around down at the park and not ask for help, I'm not going to feel quite as bad if you break a law and we come and reinforce our laws and what's acceptable in the parks. And I think that's I think what I really feel, and I know our public safety is really reaching out in that direction and trying to say, let's follow the laws. And when you're going against those laws, then you need to be called on it. And I think that's what our public wants. But I do believe that, and especially that's why I'm also hoping that the car camping will come available, that there are a lot of people in our community that really need help, and gathering in one spot with people who can help facilitate that is a positive, and it's at least a step in the direction. So once again, I am going to reiterate my support, and I know I have to leave in 3 minutes, so I'm just going to put it out there that my support is for moving forward and giving them an option of thinking that I would just as soon go direct. I think that a lot of times when we do things and you just open it up for the whole social services, that will come after when we get our survey back, but I am willing to put my faith in the fact that most people are upset about the situation of the homeless and would like to do something. And I know we can't operate it. I don't want to operate it. I want to give it to somebody who has proven themselves to operate it. And I think it's the responsible thing to do. So my support is to directly allow funds to be used for All Care Foundation to step forward to purchase land and get it set up to operate as soon as possible.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm glad we got that in before you need to leave. Brian?
Yeah, I second what Valerie said. As gentlemen said, if they could move forward right now, it would still take 2 months, best case scenario, for them to get up and running, which is mid-December. And as we go through, and that's not even realistic at this point, but even if we go through a social services grant program and have to set up all this stuff, it's not going to be done this winter. It's going to be March. So I would just, I would essentially just second what Valerie said.
The other thing I thought about, it could be an and or an or. You want to keep both those in there, but the social services grant providing increased mental health services and addiction services to make our health community even more robust, so that this isn't just a $1 million. The word I'm thinking of isn't the right word, but wasted, and people are just left in place, but they have the opportunity to actually get better. I think would be an essential part of anything that we do.
Rob?
Yeah, I think, I really appreciated Valerie, whatever, she can't hear me now, but I really appreciated that one aspect of having people in the campground. It does help identify those who, to some degree, want and or value help. And I think that another piece of this, I really appreciate what Joel was saying about trying to communicate what he believes are their expectations. In other words, we don't feel, and I would agree with Joel, that this is not going to solve our homeless problem in its entirety. Important for the public to know that we realize that, at least some on the council. So clear expectations is a very, very important point. But back to what Joel was saying, as far as more dollars for mental health and things like that, in the campground here, which is the first step, is one of the ways to identify who needs that help. And otherwise, it's much more difficult. So again, having them together in one place as a first step helps us identify who wants, most importantly, and needs more help, and which kind of combines both what Valerie was saying and I think what Joel was saying. So I'm definitely in favor of moving forward as soon as possible.
I wanted to say, first off, I agreed with Rob that we need to make this attractive, and so we can't do it on the cheap. Going along with what Brian had said, our original target was to have something by Thanksgiving, and we're going to miss that, so I don't want to waste any more time. We need to move forward. And I definitely agree that we are going to have the people that are in there. We're not going to just warehouse them. That if they're there, that means they're interested in being helped. And this will be a way to target that. So we definitely need to boost up our mental health services. So whatever we can do to keep moving forward, I say we do it right now.
Joel?
And
Mayor, this is Vanessa.
Oh, go ahead, Vanessa.
Go ahead,
I'm
Vanessa.
sorry, Joel.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say to you, Jed and Doug, for coming forward and like it was stated earlier, kind of accepting the baton project. I'm very thankful for All Care Foundation on this. When I am out in the community and, I introduce myself as a counselor to folks, I would very confidently say 8 to 9 times out of 10, almost immediately the person that I'm talking brings up, excuse me, the issue of homelessness and that the community needs relief. So this is definitely something that the community has a really strong interest in. And I do support moving forward on partnering with All Care Foundation. And I would like the development of a proposal brought forward in 2 weeks as offered.
Thank you. Go ahead, Joel.
I just had one more comment. and this will come into an agenda item later on that I think we need to add, that no citizen above the law. And so we all need to obey the law, whether it's set a fire or littering or whatever. If you live in a mansion or you live in a tent, you're not above the law, you know, especially if you murder somebody or whatever, but all laws. So we need to have that equality under the law. I think that's an important concept as we move forward. And what we tolerate is what we promote. If we tolerate prostitution, if we tolerate drug use, if we tolerate people being rude to each other, that's what we're going to encourage. So I think that's also another important part of what we're talking about.
Again, I think if you were the Mid-Rogue retreat facilities, they do have rules about people's behavior. Kurt.
One last comment. I appreciate that, Joel, you kind of broke down the cost per person. And while that's a little jarring at first, you know, I think a lot of our residents who are upset with homelessness feel like we're just going to go out and grab everybody and incarcerate them. And if we did, the cost per person for this would be a bargain. The cost of incarcerating would be far more than what it costs to do this. So I want to throw that out.
All right, I think really the step here, do you have something, Rick? Okay, go ahead.
A good part of my life, wife and I have gone on mission trips to help people, and one thing I have no problem with that, with moving forward to help people. The aspect that really concerns me is the public perception of what we're doing, or what the public perception of when you do something, what is the impact. And I can see some form of a campground, but the thing is that really concerns me, even though if we go forward with that campground, is it going to change what's happening in the parks? And as Joel said, it probably is not going to change it, but we do need to enforce when they're breaking the rules. But I see the ire of the public pointing at the city council and said, you went and built this and yet it didn't change anything. And that's what concerns me. Also, the concern is it's an additional facility, and Joel already said some people from Medford are coming over here because they like it better. So those are part of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seems like we have support for moving forward in some form. Vanessa has asked to bring it up again in 2 weeks. Okay, second from Rob. I'm not 100% sure we need to wait that long, but we do need to probably get it onto a meeting in the future. Aaron.
I see a couple.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I just wanted to clarify, it was offered by Mr. Walker that he could develop a proposal and bring it forward in 2 weeks. So if he's able to do that sooner, that's wonderful. If not, if he needs to stick to that original commitment, that's fine as well.
Okay, thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, we've talked about two options. The one which was if you set up some kind of social services grant program, staff would need to set that up, and then we do an application, you do a call for interest, and you do a review process, so that would take as you can see, a designated amount of time. The other aspect that was discussed today was a direct allocation for this request. And from that perspective, that could be done timeline much quicker if that's what council's desire is. I mean, technically, you could have it on this Wednesday night's meeting through a resolution that you're allocating $1.2 million to the foundation for social services with regards to their request. And it'd be similar to the resolution that council did for the $3 million for the water treatment plant, is in essence what you'd be doing. So that could be that quick. And so from that standpoint, that sort of gives you an idea of ultimately those two options. The third issue associated with all this is, I know it takes time to acquire property, go through escrow, those kind of things. That would need to take place on their end. On our end, Brad has talked to me, and due to the type of service that we're talking about and our current code, there's a mandatory 2 public hearings associated with this type of activity. So we'd be about 90 days into it before the, as Councilor Collins mentioned, the cutting of the tape, of the ribbon. You'd be about 90 days out from the initial application, I believe. Is that about correct on that? Okay, let me get a head shake there. So those are the 2 options from a time standpoint of internal processing. That gives you an additional idea of putting it all together.
Yeah, before you go, Brian, I think we may have some questions about the zoning and the specific properties that we would want to address, perhaps in an executive session before, moving forward. So just keep that in mind. But I've heard Valerie and Brian so far say that they are in favor of a direct allocation rather than just establishing a social services, general social services grant. But haven't heard from everybody on that topic. Rob?
So I have a question about one of the things you just mentioned. I'm not sure who I'm addressing it to, whether it be Aaron or Doug or whoever, but so does the city have any say then as far as which property you might choose or where it would go? In other words, if there were 2, is the count, or once we decide that we're going to allocate the money, the city has no more say?
So as recommended, it would be that if you were to do a program like this or to provide resources, that the city would just be providing resources. And ultimately, it would be the foundation's decision on what is the best fit associated with their partnership with Rover Tree.
Doug and Jed, if we were to schedule an executive session next week to discuss which properties you're looking at, do you think that you'd be able to participate? And
so that wouldn't, I was talking with Mark, I think that would actually apply to executive session because we're not the one purchasing the property, so it wouldn't be an executive session discussion.
Okay. Never mind. Brian?
Yeah, just on that same topic, on property and location, I know that that's the trickiest piece of this whole thing is where's a good place to put it. And, at this point, since we can't do it in executive session, personally, I have enough trust in All Care and in the individuals that are on the other side of the dais here that personally I am willing to trust that they will do a good job in citing this. Thanks.
I personally agree, and I know they've explained at some length to a different member, at least, of the All Care Foundation, what some of the council's, considerations would be in that. So I think that they have a fair idea of some of the concerns that we have. All right, as far as direct allocation or establishing some sort of social services grant program, anybody else want to chime in on that? Joel?
Well, I think the grant program is important for the psychiatric and addiction services. Because that's an important piece of this, and without that, it doesn't work. And I think that All Care is a good conduit to that, connections there. But I also think that our nonprofits and our medical community need to think about that a little bit and come back to a proposal that hopefully work.
Sure.
And what that's like.
We do have a workshop scheduled for the 18th to discuss mental health and addiction services, public health. So we may have a better idea after that, as well as the survey, the extent of people's interest in that.
So I have a question for Mark. So what kind of assurance does the city have after we give them the 1.2 million, they're going to continue to run a facility like that on that piece of property?
To provide assurances for that, you'd have to, set up some kind of grant program and set the sideboards for it. You'd have a grant agreement, essentially like any other contract you'd sign with someone, and you'd condition the funds upon performance of certain types of services.
But yep, if in 3 years they decide to build a, a high-end hotel on that property, that wasn't consistent with what our intent was, what kind of legal protections do we have against something like that?
Well, I suppose as part of the agreement to grant funds, they could provide a trust deed against the property and a covenant. And typically a trust deed is something that secures repayment, but it could secure the performance of anything. It could secure the performance of covenants.
Yeah, I'll leave that up to you, and I'm sure you can do it, but it is a concern of mine. It's a concern of mine, maybe the whole council, so.
Rick?
I like the comments that have been made about the grant program because I think it guarantees that the funds would be used as we designated. Thank you.
How so? Can you explain how it would differ from offering a direct grant? I mean, I think the question here is whether to provide a grant for one program, a designated program, or whether to just create a general social services grant category and have them and potentially other community partners apply for those same grant funds. But I think in terms of the specific contract, I'm not sure it would matter.
I think those details would come out in the workshop as we look at the different aspects, but I don't have the answer, no.
Okay. Brian?
I think
Mayor?
Go
ahead, Vanessa.
I'm just going to thank you guys in advance for forgiving me for interrupting each and every one of you almost. I am in support of a direct line allocation to All Care.
Thank you. Is that all? Okay, Brian.
Of course with...
Go ahead.
Yeah, of course with an inclusion that the funds are spent on, the project that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Brian.
So I think the one point of maybe discussion still is the amount, because what All Care presented was a number with some bullet points, and it seems that we might not need that right away. So I don't know where or when that discussion happens as far as the amount that we would be allocating. I don't know if that's open session, executive session, but I think that discussion needs to happen soon.
Sure. I guess my intent is to get this on Wednesday night meeting, either this week or 2 weeks from now, but I'm trying to figure out what plan we're talking about. And so far, I think I've heard 3 people, Valerie, Brian, and Vanessa, be in support of direct allocation to All Care Foundation just for this one project. And I've heard Joel and Rick speak up in favor of creating a more generalized social services grant program. Rob?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of direct allocation also.
Thank you. Kurt?
So I think Rob brings up some reasonable questions. If we do a direct allocation, can we put conditions on it?
As City Attorney mentioned, it would be like a direct grant allocation, and what he stated previously could still apply.
Okay. Then I'd be in favor of a direct allocation just for the time urgency.
Okay. So at this point now I have 5 in favor of a direct allocation. So let's get that maybe going for October 20th, since we have some deals to work out, and it sounds like that'll give the All Care Foundation a little bit of time to investigate properties and come up with a better dollar figure for what their request is, and give Mark a chance to work on some contract language so that council knows a little bit better what they're agreeing to before they actually agree to anything. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's clear for me. We'll be working with All Care Foundation to get some additional details, so there's some form of like a grant type of format of information in the background, so you'll know more about what that's going towards.
Okay. Any questions, council? Any questions from Doug or Jed while you're still here? All All right, thank you very much for being with us today and helping us work through this issue. Feels like we may have some light at the end of this tunnel, so thank you. All right. Make sure I'm not skipping anything. I think we have agenda review next, is that right? Okay, agenda review. And so we do have a meeting this Wednesday. You'll notice since the last time we met, we moved several items onto the consent calendar because they were just kind of procedural contract type things. However, Councilor Ogier has requested that we move the item having to do with the $3 million of ARPA funds to the Water Capital Fund, moving that back to council action. So we will do that for Wednesday night. Other than that, we have a public hearing right now scheduled to designate, consider designating Riverside Park and Caveman Bridge as local historic landmarks. And then our council action would have that American Rescue Plan Act $3 million designation towards the Water Capital Fund. Then consent calendar would have a resolution to extend the street sweeping contract, resolution on the wastewater master services agreement, a resolution that would award the City Hall canopy re-roofing project. That one has a star on it. Somebody had a question on that one. And a resolution to renew our contract with Josephine County Community Corrections, and a resolution to adjust the salary schedules for our non-bargaining employees. Does anybody have questions or comments about any of that? Trying to wait for people to chime in. Okay. The next week's workshop right now has the pool task force recommendations, as well as a discussion about water treatment plant owner's representative phase 1 services. Then the October 18th workshop has public health, mental health, and addiction services overview, just look at what's gone in our community. And then October 20th, we will try to add that ARPA discussion regarding the urban campground, assuming that everything's on track to talk about that again on the 20th. We're also slated right now to meet the DMO executive director that they've just hired. Consider a resolution that would create new LB projects, that's land and building project for Loveless Park, or the B Street jumps. And consent calendar that day would have a potential decision on something having to do with the water treatment plant owner's representative services phase 1, as well as a resolution on the ODOT Allen Creek improvements agreement. Any questions, changes on any of that? All right. I have a question, I guess, regarding the Loveless Park B Street jumps. Is that something that needs a workshop? What is that? Or not a workshop, but just a presentation and discussion?
You want? So in order, the council a couple of months ago made the decision to give $10,000 towards that project, and the Rogue Valley Mountain Bike Association has raised an additional $17,000. So basically, given that private funding, which would be implemented, through the city, we just wanted to create the actual LB account so that we have a place to put that money and actually implement the project. So it's fairly administrative in nature as far as the action. It's just really creating the LB account where those funds can be transferred into.
Just sounds a little like a consent item to me. Is there any reason? Does anybody want a presentation on that? All right, we'll move that one onto consent. One thing that we discussed at our agenda review meeting last week was just trying to move as many of those little procedural things as possible onto consent calendar. We don't need to have big weighty discussions about little things like that. But of course, if you do have questions or want a discussion, we can also always move it off of consent calendar as well. So you'll just need to remember to speak up if there's something that ends up on consent that you would rather talk about. All right, are there any topics that you would like to add going forward? Joel?
Well, we don't need to do it today, but I think we need to have it on our radar. Duty associated with fire prevention and public land stewardship within the city and on city lands, also where it can affect city lands, and whether it's a fire position or a police position or a parks position. I would start administration to come up with some proposal to address that. And what I'm thinking of is posting things so that people know what the law is in terms of fires, and then enforcing those appropriately, and litter or other things associated with our public lands. Because if we don't do that, then it turns out like the Illinois River about 30 years ago, and it's a mess. So we do need some kind of land stewardship out there with some kind of equal enforcement of the law to protect all citizens for fire prevention and administration of the laws on those public lands.
These are city-owned properties that you're...
Well, you know, that would be one of the goals. I'm sure if you integrate it with other resources that the city need, that they come up with that probably even more efficient solution. But I think we need to address that topic because right now I don't, and the lands aren't city lands, unfortunately, but like the fire up there at Dollar Mountain, it was, there's no campfires are not allowed signs. There's no person specifically assigned, unless there's something I'm unaware of, to monitor those activities. Cathedral Hills, which is BLM, and maybe some of this can be done through a memorandum of understanding, maybe not. And then we have the enforcement of laws throughout the park and city lands that we all need to abide by.
Okay, are you asking for a workshop on this topic? Just trying to figure out exactly what you're asking for.
You know, I think that would be a good start, and whether it goes somewhere or not, depending on what the options could be. I could see many different options to it. But yeah, I would ask for a workshop on that. And it doesn't have to be immediately, but I would think we would have to have something in place, even if we do no action, by next fire season, because of the urgency of protection of property.
All right, is this something that council's interested in having a workshop on? Go ahead.
I just have a question because I know we had a workshop maybe a couple months ago where Chief Johnson talked about a lot of the fire risks that we have now and you know, presented a whole list of options of things that we can do. So is this separate from that, or is this integrated in with what he's already doing?
It needs to be integrated in with other efforts as well. What I'm used to, Brian, is a fire prevention technician where they would go all around and they would go everywhere. Of course, we had a larger area to serve. So it would have to be integrated with perhaps other functions as well, such as a parks function or a police function. I don't know where you would want to integrate it because it's not a full-time fire prevention position. We don't have that workload.
We do have a Firewise coordinator on staff already, so is that something that they can, that falls under their scope?
That certainly could be an option if there's that flexibility. We just need to understand that. So it's, I see Aaron scratching his head down there, so, which is a good thing.
Number of questions, and I don't think now's the time to ask those because it's not a topic for discussion, but I do have some questions.
Which is good. That's good. Thank you.
All right, is there council support for getting this discussion on a future agenda? I'm seeing Kurt nod. Rick's confused.
I'd like to hear, I think maybe Joel needs to talk to Aaron and flesh out some of those ideas. And then I'm willing to entertain a workshop, but I think there's some other.
So let me meet with the city manager to see what his questions are, and then we'll come back to you. Does that sound fair?
Sounds perfect. Thank you,
Yeah,
Joel.
that'd be great.
Other discussion? Brian?
So on the back, there's the list of other items to be scheduled for future workshops, and one of them is council bus tour.
Yeah.
I know in the past, there's been some interest in having council look at some of the city sites, including the city yard and perhaps the public safety station and maybe other sites too. And since our agenda, is kind of looking light out in the distance, I thought it might be a good time to bring that up again. So maybe, we could consider, maybe not doing them all in one day, but maybe picking one or two and having council, take a look at those.
Thanks. Yeah, we did mention that in our discussion last week. Is there council interest in doing a bus tour of our facility? And if so, I guess what's your top priority? Go ahead, Vanessa.
Actually, it was me, Mayor.
Oh.
We actually, Jackson County or Josephine County Transit is actually short-staffed currently. So let me check with them if they have availability for a bus driver.
Oh, okay.
Because we had an email a couple weeks ago that they are short-staffed, so they're having problems running buses currently.
Okay. We have cars too if we need to go that way. Is there a particular facility you wanted to look at?
Well, the two that jumped out at me were the city yard and public safety. But I know there's others, so I'm open to suggestions.
Okay. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to see particularly? Okay. Well, we will work on getting something scheduled. Obviously, the public safety is so close, we could walk over there. All right. Any other topics? All right. One topic I have before I read our executive session statement is just that we did have a request from the media to sit in again on the labor negotiations discussion. So is the council willing to have media sit in on that? Seeing yeses, no objections? All right. They can stay. In that case, I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session. Brian, go ahead.
I move we adjourn into executive session.
Second from Rob, thank you. All in favor of adjourning into executive session, say all the hands in the room. That's
Aye.
all. Thank you, Vanessa. All right. For the purpose of discussing those subjects previously noticed for this executive session, which are labor negotiations as well as real estate property transactions. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 112.660 and more specifically under the subsections of that statute which have been publicly noticed for this meeting. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically asked not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session today, we are not expected to return into open session, and we will just reconvene Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. And with that, let's take a recess until 1:55. Thank you.